Well, Craig, welcome to OnPolitics. So Donald Trump found himself once again in a crisis over his handling of the Charlottesville unrest last week, and of course the tragic death of a protester down there. First, refusing to condemn by name the white supremacists who were marching, then doing so, and then backtracking in a rather bizarre press conference on Tuesday. But I want to just bring our viewers up to date. Some tweets this morning. Trump again is doubling down on this position, first attacking two sitting U.S. senators of his own party, and then tweeting, "It's sad to see the history and culture of this great country being ripped apart. You can't change history. So foolish. Also, the great beauty is being taken out of our cities, towns, and parks." He's talking about the monuments being taken down to Confederates. Craig, what position does this leave Republicans of his own party in?
Well, an incredibly painful one, I would say. And we've seen this throughout the Trump presidency, the short Trump presidency, where Republican politicians have been constantly placed in the position of being forced to respond to things that Trump has said or done, to controversial things he said or done, to things that they either may adamantly disagree with, or just subjects they don't want to talk about and would rather ignore. And they're caught in a terrible place where the president is attacking them for not getting their agenda through Congress. At the same time, he's making it more difficult, arguably, for them to do anything in Congress with these firestorms and these uproars. And they're also tortured over whether to criticize the president directly when they do disagree with him. We saw that again with Charlottesville, with the president's comments about Charlottesville, where not very many Republican members of Congress criticized the president by name. A larger number distanced themselves from what the president was saying and expressed their own points of view. If you look at the Wisconsin congressional delegation, only one, Mike Gallagher, the freshman Republican from Green Bay, criticized President Trump by name over how he's handled the Charlottesville issue.
So, Craig, why not criticize Trump by name? I mean, these are neo-Nazis, white supremacists marching in a community. There was a time not long ago when that would have been unthinkable.
Why not? Well, the president still politically has a lot of support from Republican voters. So there has been this persistent fear on the part of Republican politicians that if they become in opposition to the president or criticize a pretty thin-skinned president, that they'll face a backlash from people, voters in their own party. They may face a primary if they are up for re-election. Again, you alluded to the tweets this morning, the president's tweets against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina and Jeff Flake in Arizona. That's a pretty good example of how the president will turn his fire on his critics within his own party, just as he turned his fire on House Speaker Paul Ryan during the campaign. And Ryan found himself sort of defined as a Trump critic within his party and has tried very hard, as we've seen, since Trump became president, to not be defined as a Trump critic within his party because he's trying to get his agenda passed.
So they're still trying to do that. And Mitch McConnell, of course, found himself in the crosshairs this week.
Absolutely. So, you can find yourself under attack, a Republican, from your president, either for failing to succeed in getting legislation passed in Congress, or if he perceives you as critical of his rhetoric, that's going to happen too. So that's a very obviously uncomfortable position. I mean, a lot of these Republicans have been attacked and criticized for being too timid, and that's a legitimate issue. At the same time, they're kind of in a no-win position, and it's going to be a very painful period going forward through this midterm election cycle with the weight of an unpopular president hanging on them. So far, an inability to really do the big dramatic things in Congress they want to do, and then this just sort of constant drumbeat of controversy on very painful hot-button issues in which they're being forced to sort of weigh in when the president is saying things that make them very uncomfortable.
So talk about this Republican agenda. To what extent does this make it harder, this controversy over Charlottesville, make it harder for the Republicans to focus, say, on tax reform?
Well, it makes it harder, but you can't put it all on that. In other words, they've they have yet to show that the consensus exists within the party to do some of these things. In some cases, the things they're talking about doing may not be, the problem may be just that they're not politically popular with the American public. In other cases, it may just be also that the consensus doesn't exist across the spectrum of the Republican Party in Congress. That was certainly the case. Both the things were the case with health care, where it was an unpopular bill, and also in the Senate, there was no consensus in the party on what kind of bill they needed to pass. And it remains to be seen whether that's going to be true of tax reform, which is the next big item. Tax reform is already more difficult because of the failure to pass health care reform. That makes the numbers harder to add up in the tax reform proposals. But this obviously doesn't help. It's at a minimum a distraction. It creates division and friction within the Republican Party, and you have someone like Paul Ryan who's been trying very hard to sort of message on tax reform now for the past month, and it all gets kind of lost in the uproar and the clamor over something like Charlottesville and the president's comments.